Suddenly, a nearby house top-floor window opened. One of the men who had been outside with them poked his head out and looked around at the carnage before asking, "So it's over, is it?"
"No thanks to you," came Maestro's angry reply. "And if any more come, I've a bloody good mind to blow the locks off your front door and see what you do then."
Dieter stood up suddenly, a look of concern on his face. The others saw it and didn't like it one bit. The man in the window had seen something off in the distance, from his great vantage point, panicked, and shot back inside, pulling the window closed with great haste, just as a unit of 10 storm vermin appeared out of the tree line once more, halberds propped up on their shoulders in a marching position. Anastasia shrieked in fear. Tordrad glared at them as he reaffixed his armour plating back into place. Maestro rolled his eyes in what at first glance might have seemed like an easy-going reaction of "here we go again," yet it was in fearful disbelief that the nightmare was indeed not over. Rysandria could not draw her eyes from the corpses of the two men, still being devoured by rats on the ground. She considered whether they deserved to have their souls consecrated by holy prayer after what they were planning to do to Anastasia. She then fought that momentary feeling away, knowing that her order believed everyone deserved respect in death, that every soul was sacred. Dieter asked Rysandria, "Is Olga all right to fight?" Rysandria looked at the dog with its tongue out panting and suggested, "He needs rest." Dieter replied, "No chance of that. Lots of them coming in. I felt the vibrations." Tobias complained, "We should have left while we had the chance." Dieter responded, "No chance of that either. We would have run into them anyway. I feel them coming from everywhere. We might not have had such a favourable positioning as this, somewhere out there." The others looked at Dieter momentarily, as if he must surely hold some hidden secrets or powers that they didn't know about, then turned their attention back to the oncoming Skaven forces, appearing from the undergrowth in 3 places at once. Still some distance away, but closing fast. The Skaven forces came en masse this time. The group's ranged shots did little to the enemy numbers from long range. They did not panic, nor delay for even a moment. Suddenly, a strange puff of smoke upon the raised platform they stood upon got their attention. One of the black hooded assassins had appeared out of nowhere and had his blades aimed for what he considered to be the least armed and weakest of the group, Rysandria. Tordrad saw this and sped forwards into a lunge which carried hard into the side of the devious killer rat man, who judged his oncoming foe's trajectory well and jumped over the blade itself. Though Tordrad's brute strength still lifted the killer along the ground and away from the woman, whose concentration was elsewhere anyway, focusing on keeping holy blessings freshly committed to this site of battle. The assassin backflipped away from the Kislevite, and as he did so, he landed a kick into the taller man's jaw. Tordrad spat blood onto the ground and roared in challenge, rushing out to meet the Skaven as it retreated. Maestro's concern wasn't the assassin itself, but the spell which had brought the foul creature to them. It had been a teleportation spell that had carried it here, and that could indicate one very serious threat was approaching. A Grey Seer. He had no way of seeing where it was yet, as Skaven leaders always led from the rear, a place of pride and honour. To be sneaky and expect others to die instead of you was one of the greatest leadership traits that could be considered in a potential governing warlord. The rest of the Skaven was still some way off, but what concerned Tobias, as he watched, was Tordrad's hot-headed attack. He was lunging and missing as the crafty assassin kept flipping and backing away from the man, drawing him further away from his friends. Tobias aimed his crossbow to try and line up a shot with the assassin, but Tordrad's bulk kept obstructing the view. There was a chance he would hit the Kislevite. If he fired, he cursed quietly and tripled that curse when 2 more of the devious assassins appeared as if from out of nowhere, surrounding Tordrad on 3 sides at once. The Eshin triad was complete, and focused together on one target. Tordrad realised too late the situation he was now in. He was too far from Rysandria for her protective blessings to be of any good, and too far from his allies for anyone to help him fend the assassins off. He fought defensively as best as he could, but that wouldn't be enough to hold off for long. He figured he perhaps only had mere moments left to live. Already a number of blows from the assassin's throwing stars had connected. They were softening him up from 3 directions at once. He was lucky that these weapons weren't poisoned, but the blades and claws they wielded left him in no doubt of poison being present, as they dripped with a luminous green substance. Tordrad's blood dripped to the ground from several wounds. One across his forehead was bleeding across his eye, as the crimson life force poured out of his body. Dieter, who had been watching, likened it to losing his own. After all, were Tordrad to die, it would mean he too was closer to the end, closer to Mor's eternal imprisonment. That was not acceptable. Dieter's panic at this thought made him realise how small, how human he still was. There was something that could still frighten him. Regardless, he let those emotions run wild and the winds of ether gathered about him. He hadn't cast this spell in a while, because it was dangerous. It would mean him coming closer to the other. But there was nothing else left but that choice. With his willpower he tore open a brief gateway through reality and stepped through it. On the other side, he half slid, half walked through a sepia-toned subdomain that resembled the real world, except that spirits were also present and visible. It was a dangerous place for him to tread, closer to the demonic realm than the physical dimension was. This was a place known as the Hedge. As he moved through time here, long moments or minutes could pass by, while in the real world perhaps only a second or 2 will have gone by. Dieter raced as fast as he could towards Tordrad, who was moving in a strange blur of slow motion to avoid numerous incoming attacks from the Skaven. Some were beginning to connect, slashing into his thick plate armour, which was for now providing enough protection. Dieter was getting close. He knew that he would have very little physical manipulation of other events in the real world from here. He would only have the time to rescue Tordrad. He reached both hands out of the hedge reality and clasped the man. At that same moment, in the physical realm, the Eshin assassins jumped backwards in fright, seeing a shimmering disturbance, then 2 hands reach out of thin air. A terrible magic power was at play, similar in feeling to that which they had witnessed from their greatest mages, the Greyseers. At once, the 3 of them tensed their glands as if to squirt the musk of fear. Not that they could, of course, because Eshin assassins would have their glands removed, so that no scent would betray them to their would-be targets. Skaven had a much better sense of smell than humans, and given that most of their targets were indeed Skaven, this was important. Just as Dieter grasped Tordrad tightly with both hands, a presence and resonating vibration that resembled a voice came from behind him.
You've left yourself open to me, brother. It's my turn now.
Dieter screamed as the dark silhouette-like person stepped into him and absorbed into his body. The spirit looked very much like Dieter, and as it entered the would-be doctor's body, his own body altered too. His eyes became black, and his skin looked strange, like a translucent shadow that showed his real skin underneath it. The now possessed Dieter pulled Tordrad back into the hedge, with a supernatural strength far beyond that of the Kislevite man. There he moved quickly with Tordrad, backwards through the hedge, floating back to the raised platform the others waited on. In the space of just a couple of seconds, a blink of an eye, Tobias had seen Dieter disappear from the spot he had been standing on, reach Tordrad in a haze of darkness, snatch him away from the clutches of the Skaven assassins about him, and then reappear close by. The strain of this and poisoned globes of glass that had shattered near, thrown by despicable Skaven wearing breathing apparatus to keep themselves from harm, was too much for the halfling, who passed out. The last thing he saw was Dieter going crazy, tearing rat men apart with his bare hands. Then all was darkness. As Tobias came around, the sounds of fighting alerted him at once that he would still be in danger. He found this odd, as he expected to be dead. Being dead, of course, meant you were in no danger. As his eyes opened, Dieter had returned to normal, surrounded by many more Skaven corpses than there had been. Tordrad was fighting back-to-back with the trainee doctor, both wielding their melee weapons once again. As Tobias pulled himself to his feet once more, he saw that the Skaven had made it to the raised platform all around them. Huge areas of flame burnt and licked the ground here and there, making the halfling wonder what had caused that. The question was about to be answered. Dieter shouted to Maestro, "I see a new target of opportunity! Like before, ready?" Maestro shouted, "Give me a moment!" The wizard put a future sight enchantment upon himself and ran to the edge of the platform, trying to find the target that Dieter's finger was pointing at. His future sight protected him from the lunges of those few Skaven that had made it onto the platform and the ranged attacks aimed at the group from afar, by giving him minor insight into what would happen were he to step in a particular direction at any given time. He of course would have to trust that this second reason choice would be the right one, because a second new warning might not come in time in line with his new decision. Furthermore, there was the intense psychological strain such a spell would put the imbued person under, for they would often repetitively witness their own demise coming from the fate of their first choice of action. Maestro, of course, wasn't your normal psyche anyway, so this protected him from certain problems that might befall a different person. Maestro spotted the target Dieter had referred to. It was one of the Skaven weapon teams they had brought with them. Once the first Skaven had died to the group, the Gracier commanding them had decided to bring the entire army to destroy this pest, as he saw it, as of course he would be able to do, outnumbering them so greatly. What they hadn't banked on, though, was the group's teamwork, talent, and determination to win. Maestro and Dieter had already pulled this trick on several large groups of the Skaven, incinerating loads at once and making them scatter into smaller controllable packs that had either wandered towards the group and died quickly, or ran away in disorder. This time the target was not an entire group of the rat men. It was a two-man weapon team carrying a warp fire thrower. They had seen one of these make it to the platform earlier, and it had opened fire with its luminous green burning flame. Luckily, though, Rysandria had been able to uppercut her staff to the nozzle where the flame shot, sending the gout of would-be burning death up into the air above their heads. It had still rained down some smouldering, painful pieces upon their heads, but that had been better than being melted in seconds. The Shallian devotee had then crushed her staff into the pipe that fed the weapon, connected to a massive fuel pack carried by the Skaven behind. The flow of fuel blocked. The weapon stuttered and backfired, smoking terribly. The Skaven had, understandably, abandoned the pack and ran away, and there it still lay upon the ground of the platform, unexploded and lightly smoking. This time Maestro would show the Skaven the error of their ways, bringing something so dangerous and flammable into battle. He concentrated his celestial magic, and the air started kicking up. This focused downwards onto the weapon team that strode confidently beside a large unit of clan rats. As the warp fire thrower came into range, the winds increased into a swirling vortex upon them. Their enemies on the platform were now in range for their burning death. The lead Skaven at the front pulled the trigger, but as the flames shot out, they hit the swirling unnatural winds and spiraled into several luminous flaming green tails that swirled and dissipated before they could reach the group. "Part 1 done!" shouted Maestro above the din of battle around them. "Part 2 coming up!" replied Dieter, as he quickly moved to the platform's edge with a bottle of pure medicinal alcohol in his hands. It had a raggedly torn-off piece of cloth stuck into the top, soaking in the substance inside. Dieter concentrated a very small degree of fire by way of spell through his palm and into the top of the cloth, setting it alight.